My husband wouldn't marry me unless our prenup had an infidelity payout clause. 7 years later, I finally understood why. My husband had been acting strange for my entire pregnancy. Ever since my 3rd month, he'd been dropping hints about how I cheated to anyone who would listen. He told his golf buddies I'd been sneaking around. He told his mother I had secrets during our baby shower. But the strangest part was his obsession with the prenup we'd signed 7 years ago. He'd pull it out at dinner, pointing at the infidelity clause while I ate my prenatal vitamins. $10 million, he'd mutter, rubbing my belly. Your family trust becomes mine if you cheated, and DNA tests don't lie. But I hadn't cheated. I'd never even thought about it. When I was 8 months pregnant, he started preparing divorce papers. I found them in his desk drawer after a panic attack sent me searching for my anxiety medication. He'd already filled in the grounds. Adultery. The amount he wanted. $10 million. The evidence section was blank, but he'd written "coming soon" in pencil. My water broke on a Tuesday morning. Instead of worrying or rushing me to the hospital, Sean practically celebrated. He called his entire family to witness the birth. His lawyer was on standby outside the delivery room. He brought 3 cameras in with him. "This is going to be the best day of my life," he told the nurse while I screamed through contractions. "My wife's about to learn that choices have consequences." The nurse looked uncomfortable. I begged him to focus on our baby. But Sean kept pacing, going outside to talk to his lawyer, telling everyone in the room that they were about to witness something incredible. After 10 hours of labor, our daughter was born. The room went completely silent. The baby was beautiful, perfect, and unmistakably mixed race with light brown skin and textured hair. I stared in absolute shock. "That's impossible," I whispered, looking at my biracial child. I hadn't been with anyone else. Ever. Sean, however, erupted in celebration. "Yes!" he literally screamed. "I knew it! Doctor, please document the baby's appearance. I need that on record." He was already discussing with his lawyer. "We've got her. $10 million, just like the prenup says." But I was in complete shock, staring at my baby girl, trying to understand how this was possible. "Sean," I sobbed, "I swear on my mother's grave I never cheated on you." He laughed. "The baby says otherwise." Sean served me divorce papers the next morning while I was breastfeeding our daughter for the first time. His lawyer read the terms out loud. "Based on clear evidence of infidelity, my client is entitled to $10 million from your trust fund." I remember calling my family's lawyer, Mr. Torres, in tears, while Sean took selfies with the baby to document her features. He arrived within 2 hours, looked at the papers, then looked at my daughter. "Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. I'm going to investigate." Sean laughed so hard the baby started crying. 2 weeks for what? Look at the mutt. She's mixed. He actually pointed at our newborn, saying it. Mr. Torres put his hand on my shoulder. "He's not getting a dime. Give me 2 weeks." Sean chuckled like he had already won. 2 weeks later, we all met in Mr. Torres' conference room downtown. Sean showed up with champagne, already celebrating his victory. He'd been posting on social media about his cheating wife and how DNA doesn't lie. But Mr. Torres was looking at me with an unmistakable smile. He pulled out a folder thick as a phone book. "We've completed our investigation. My client, me, mentioned unusual symptoms during conception time. Unexplained sedation, forgetting time markers, waking up with odd injection marks." Sean's champagne glass froze midway to his lips. "So, maybe she was drinking." Mr. Torres connected his laptop to the conference room television. "We pulled your credit card records." Sean's face froze. 9 months ago, you purchased medical-grade sedatives and specialized insemination equipment." Sean was now pale. "That proves nothing." Mr. Torres clicked to the next document. "Your friend Terrence, who is African-American, reported a break-in at his apartment 9 months ago. Someone stole the reproductive samples he'd stored for IVF treatment with his wife. They were about to have a surrogate carry their child." Sean started sweating through his victory suit. "You can't prove that was me." Mr. Torres pulled up security footage. "This is you entering Terrence's building at 2 a.m. that night using his spare key from the gym locker you share. This is you entering your own apartment at 3 a.m. with medical supplies. This is you entering your bedroom where my client was sleeping after you drugged her tea." The room was dead silent. Mr. Torres turned to face Sean directly. "You inseminated your own wife while she was unconscious with stolen genetic material to trigger your prenup's infidelity clause. That's assault. That's theft. That's fraud. The prenup is void. You get nothing. And you're going to prison for what you did to both Sarah and Terrence." Sean stood up and bolted for the exit. I thought we'd won. I had no idea Sean had a backup plan because he'd already mapped out every exit in the building weeks ago. Mr. Torres grabbed his phone and started barking orders to building security, while Sean bolted from his chair and sprinted toward the parking garage. I watched through the conference room windows as security guards rushed to lock down the main exits. Within minutes, they had every door covered, but Sean had vanished through a service entrance near the loading dock that nobody even knew existed. My baby started crying in my arms, and I realized I'd been squeezing her too tight. Mr. Torres was already on another call with the police describing Sean's height and weight and what he was wearing. My hands shook so bad I couldn't hold her bottle steady. The formula kept spilling on her tiny outfit while Torres gave them Sean's license plate number. The security guard came in with his tablet showing footage from 20 different cameras. We watched Sean duck into a stairwell, then emerge on a lower level where he'd apparently stashed supplies. He changed his shirt and put on a baseball cap before walking calmly to a side street. The timestamp showed he'd reached a black sedan in under 3 minutes. He'd parked it there days ago according to the meter receipts the guard pulled up. This wasn't panic. This was a plan he'd practiced. Mr. Torres made more calls while I tried to process what just happened. He got through to a judge he knew and started explaining our emergency situation. Within 2 hours, we had paperwork for temporary custody, giving me full rights until Sean could be found. The judge signed it immediately after hearing about the assault charges. That night, I couldn't close my eyes without seeing Sean's face. Every car that drove past our house made me jump up and check the locks. I kept peeking through the curtains, expecting to see him standing in the yard. The baby slept in her crib next to my bed, but I kept checking she was still breathing. Around 3 in the morning, I heard footsteps on the porch and almost called 911 before realizing it was just the neighbor's cat. The next morning, Terrence called while I was feeding the baby. His voice cracked when he told me how violated he felt, knowing Sean had stolen their future child's genetic material. His wife was in therapy trying to understand how someone could do something so sick. They'd been saving for years to afford IVF, and now their samples were gone forever. He said they wanted to help prosecute Sean for everything he'd done to all of us. 3 days went by with no sign of Sean anywhere. Then the police called Torres saying Sean's credit card had been used at a gas station 200 miles north. The security footage was too blurry to confirm it was him, but the purchase was for gas and camping supplies. They issued an arrest warrant for assault, theft, and fraud that same afternoon. Federal charges were possible since he'd crossed state lines while fleeing. Torres kept digging into Sean's past and found something that made my skin crawl. Bank records showed Sean had been researching fertility clinics for over a year before our baby was conceived. He'd studied Terrence's work schedule and knew exactly when he'd be at the gym versus home. He'd withdrawn $50,000 in cash the week before I gave birth. The paper trail went back 14 months showing doctor visits and medical supply purchases. He'd even taken an online course about fertility treatments using a fake name. I couldn't stay in our house anymore knowing what he'd done to me there. Every room felt contaminated by his presence. The kitchen where he'd made me tea that night. The bedroom where he'd assaulted me while I was unconscious. Even the nursery we'd painted together felt like a lie. My parents came to help me pack, and we moved everything important to their house across town. They set up the guest room for me and the baby, while Dad installed new locks on all their doors. Mom stayed up with me when I had panic attacks in the middle of the night. 10 days after Sean ran, his mother called me sobbing. She kept saying her son would never do something so horrible and there must be some mistake. She accused me of framing him and said I'd always been after his money. But when Torres sent her the security footage and medical records, her voice went quiet. She hung up without saying goodbye, and I never heard from her again. Torres said she'd probably known something was wrong but couldn't face it. The police expanded their search, but Sean had gone completely dark after that gas station purchase. No phone calls, no credit cards, no contact with anyone we knew. Detectives thought he might be camping somewhere remote or had fake documents prepared. Torres hired a private investigator to track down any properties Sean might own under shell companies. We discovered he'd been moving money around for months before the birth. He'd opened accounts under false business names and transferred funds offshore. Everything pointed to this being planned since before I even got pregnant. A week passed with no word from Sean until the bank called Torres about someone trying to access our joint investment account from a computer in Nevada. The bank's security team had flagged the login attempt immediately and frozen the account before any money could be moved. Torres contacted the FBI right away since Sean had crossed state lines while running from assault and fraud charges. That same afternoon, Miranda Winters from the prosecutor's office called to say she was taking over the case personally. She'd handled dozens of assault cases like mine and promised she'd push for the maximum charges once they caught Sean. I started getting these creepy calls from blocked numbers where someone would just breathe into the phone for 30 seconds, then hang up. It happened 5 times in 2 days, always when I was alone with the baby. Torres got the phone company involved and they traced the calls to different burner phones bought with cash around Phoenix. That's when Torres brought in Alessandro Roman, this private investigator who specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. Alessandro spent 3 days tracking Sean's movements through security cameras and credit reports. He discovered Sean had rented an apartment in Phoenix under the name Michael Roberts, paying 3 months upfront in cash. Sean had been careful, using only cash and staying away from places with cameras, but he made one stupid mistake. He used his real driver's license at a pharmacy to pick up his anxiety medication. The pharmacist remembered him because Sean had argued about the price and demanded to speak to the manager. Alessandro called the FBI with the apartment address, and they moved fast. At 4 in the morning, 6 agents surrounded Sean's Phoenix apartment while he was sleeping. They broke down the door and found him trying to flush documents down the toilet. Sean kept yelling that I'd consented to everything, that it was all part of our plan to have a baby. But the agents found 3 journals in his closet with detailed plans about drugging me and stealing Terrence's genetic material. One journal entry from 14 months ago outlined exactly how he'd trigger the prenup's infidelity clause. Another entry calculated how long it would take to get the $10 million after the baby was born. The FBI flew Sean back for his perp walk 2 days later. Reporters packed the sidewalk outside the federal building, shouting questions while Sean kept his head down. His expensive Italian suit was gone, replaced with an orange jumpsuit that made him look small and defeated. The smug smile he'd worn in Torres's conference room had completely disappeared. At the arraignment 3 days later, Sean stood before Judge Kieran McGill and pleaded not guilty to all charges. His lawyer argued for reasonable bail, saying Sean had strong community ties and wasn't a flight risk. Judge McGill actually laughed at that, pointing out Sean had literally fled to another state with $50,000 in cash. The judge set bail at $2 million, which Sean couldn't pay without accessing his frozen assets. His lawyer tried to argue that was excessive, but McGill shut him down fast. 2 weeks later, I had to testify before a grand jury about the night Sean drugged and assaulted me. The prosecutors showed the security footage while I described waking up confused the next morning with injection marks on my thigh. I threw up twice during my testimony. Once when they showed pictures of the medical equipment Sean had bought. But I kept going, speaking clearly about every detail I could remember for my daughter's sake. The grand jury took less than an hour to indict Sean on 12 separate counts. Miranda Winters called me afterward to say it was one of the strongest cases she'd ever presented. The charges included sexual assault, reproductive coercion, theft of genetic material, fraud, and conspiracy. Each count carried serious prison time, and Miranda said they'd push for consecutive sentences, not concurrent ones. Sean's lawyer tried one last desperate move at the preliminary hearing. He argued the prenup itself proved I must have consented to avoid losing $10 million from my trust fund. He actually stood there claiming no woman would risk that much money unless she'd agreed to the plan. Torres destroyed that argument in under 5 minutes. He showed the court that the prenup was signed 7 years before Sean even met Terrence or started planning this scheme. The timeline made it impossible for me to have known about or agreed to Sean's plan. The judge dismissed the defense's motion and set a trial date for 3 months out. Sean would stay in jail until then since he couldn't make bail, and his lawyer was already talking about a plea deal. Miranda told me they'd offered 15 years if he admitted guilt, but Sean had refused, still insisting I'd been part of the whole thing. 3 days later, Terrence called me while I was feeding the baby her morning bottle. His voice cracked when he told me about the civil lawsuit his lawyer had filed against Sean. He and his wife had spent months planning their IVF journey before Sean stole their samples from the fertility clinic's storage. The violation had sent them both into counseling to deal with the trauma of their reproductive material being weaponized. Their therapist recommended they take legal action as part of their healing process. The lawsuit sought damages for emotional distress, theft of genetic material, and the cost of their ruined IVF cycle. Terrence's wife couldn't even look at baby pictures anymore without breaking down in tears. They'd already picked out names for their future child before Sean destroyed everything. The next morning, a woman from Child Protective Services knocked on my parents' door where I was staying. Evie Schaefer showed her badge and explained she needed to evaluate my daughter's living situation given the criminal case. She spent 4 hours watching me care for the baby, checking the nursery, and asking detailed questions about our daily routine. She examined the baby's medical records, vaccination schedule, and noted how alert and responsive my daughter was during feeding. My mother showed her the security system we'd installed and the baby monitor in every room. Evie took photos of the fully stocked changing table, the organized formula station, and the safety gates we'd put up. She interviewed my parents about their support role and watched me soothe the baby when she got fussy. After reviewing everything, Evie wrote in her report that my daughter was thriving despite the circumstances surrounding her birth. She noted the strong family support system and my attentive care as positive factors. The report would help counter any custody challenges Sean might attempt from prison. That same week, Sean's mother finally called after weeks of silence since seeing the evidence. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her at first. She admitted she'd noticed Sean acting strange for months before the baby was born. He'd been researching medical procedures online and had become obsessed with reading the prenup over and over. She'd found receipts for medical supplies in his car, but he'd told her they were for a friend. She remembered him asking odd questions about genetics and fertility treatments at family dinners. Now it all made horrible sense, and she felt sick for not recognizing the warning signs. She agreed to provide a statement to prosecutors about his behavior leading up to my pregnancy. Her testimony would help establish premeditation and the lengthy planning that went into his scheme. Meanwhile, my daughter had started smiling at 3 months old, her whole face lighting up when I sang to her. She'd coo and babble during diaper changes, completely unaware of the legal chaos swirling around her existence. Those pure moments of baby joy kept me grounded when anxiety threatened to overwhelm me. I'd hold her during the endless phone calls with lawyers, and she'd grab my finger with her tiny hand. Her innocent happiness reminded me what I was fighting for in all these legal proceedings. At night, I'd watch her sleep peacefully and promise her I'd protect her from Sean's poison. The prosecutor's office assigned Victor Winters to handle the financial fraud aspects of Sean's case. He discovered Sean had taken out 3 separate life insurance policies on our daughter before she was born. The policies totaled $2 million with Sean as the sole beneficiary if anything happened to the baby. Victor found evidence Sean had researched infant mortality rates and accidental death statistics while setting up the policies. He'd also opened investment accounts in the baby's name without my knowledge, planning to control her finances. The insurance companies immediately canceled the policies once Victor notified them of the criminal charges. This discovery added federal fraud charges to Sean's growing list of crimes, since he'd crossed state lines. Victor worked with the FBI to freeze additional accounts Sean had hidden from our marriage. The investigation kept revealing new layers of Sean's deception and financial manipulation. 2 weeks later, I had my first appointment with Bernadette Cook, a therapist who specialized in betrayal trauma. I spent the entire session crying while trying to explain how someone I'd loved could violate me so completely. Bernadette helped me understand that Sean's actions weren't my fault, despite his attempts to paint me as the villain. She explained how predators like Sean choose victims carefully and manipulate situations to maintain control. We worked through exercises to recognize the gaslighting he'd subjected me to for months. She taught me grounding techniques for when panic attacks hit during legal proceedings. Our sessions became a safe space where I could express rage without judgment. Bernadette validated my feelings of violation and helped me process the trauma of being drugged and assaulted. She reminded me that healing wasn't linear, and some days would be harder than others. Sean tried to fire his court-appointed lawyer the following week, filing a motion to represent himself. He claimed everyone was conspiring against him and only he could properly defend his innocence. Judge McGill held an emergency hearing where Sean ranted about being framed and persecuted. The judge calmly explained that given the serious federal charges, Sean needed proper legal representation. McGill denied the motion and warned Sean that disrupting his defense would only hurt his case. Sean's lawyer looked exhausted trying to manage his difficult client, who kept insisting on his innocence. The situation made headlines when a reporter connected our case to similar reproductive fraud cases nationwide. My phone rang constantly with interview requests from major news outlets wanting exclusive stories. I declined every single request, not wanting my daughter's face plastered across television screens. The media coverage put pressure on prosecutors to seek maximum sentences for these types of violations. Women's rights organizations started calling for stronger laws against reproductive coercion and assault. Mr. Torres used the media attention to file for divorce with a motion to void the prenup entirely. The family court judge reviewed the criminal evidence and agreed the prenup was invalid due to fraud. The ruling meant Sean couldn't claim any of my trust fund money, despite his elaborate scheme. The divorce proceedings moved quickly with Sean having no leverage from his jail cell. Within a month, the divorce was finalized with me receiving all marital assets and sole custody. Sean started writing letters from jail to our mutual friends, spinning wild stories about being set up. He claimed I'd seduced Terrence and orchestrated everything to steal his money and destroy his life. Most friends saw through his desperate lies and sent me the letters as evidence of his continued harassment. But a few people we'd known for years actually believed him and cut off all contact with me. Their betrayal stung, but I focused on the friends who stood by me through this nightmare. Detective Decker called me 3 days later while I was feeding my daughter breakfast. He said 2 women had reached out to the police after seeing Sean's arrest on the news. Both women remembered feeling weird after parties Sean attended years ago, waking up confused with gaps in their memory. One woman found bruises she couldn't explain, and the other had strange marks on her arm like injection sites. They'd always wondered what happened but never had proof until they saw the details of my case. Decker asked if I could come to the station to discuss patterns in Sean's behavior that might help their investigation. I drove there with my daughter sleeping in her car seat, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The detective showed me photos from parties dating back 5 years where Sean appeared in the background near these women. My stomach turned seeing his face in photo after photo, always watching, always planning. The prosecutor Miranda called that afternoon to say they were adding the new charges, even though proving them would be harder without physical evidence. She explained that showing Sean's pattern of drugging women would strengthen my case, and might convince a jury he was dangerous enough for maximum sentencing. The legal team worked through the weekend pulling together evidence from the other victims' medical records and witness statements from the parties. I had to testify again about Sean's behavior around alcohol and how he always insisted on making drinks for everyone. 3 weeks later, we all gathered in family court for the custody hearing with Sean appearing on a screen from jail. He sat there in his orange jumpsuit trying to argue he deserved visitation rights with our daughter. Judge McGill looked at him like he was insane while Sean's lawyer tried to make the case that being in prison didn't automatically mean losing parental rights. Sean actually said he wanted to be part of his daughter's life, and that keeping her from him was cruel. The judge cut him off and said that given the circumstances of her conception through assault and fraud, Sean would have no custody or visitation rights ever. My parents noticed someone taking pictures of their house the next morning from a car parked across the street. When my dad walked outside to confront them, the car sped away before he could get the license plate. We called the police but couldn't prove it was connected to Sean, though the timing seemed way too suspicious to be random. My parents hired a security company that same day to install cameras and have someone patrol their property at night. The guard caught the same car driving by slowly 2 nights later and got the plate number, but it turned out to be a rental paid for with cash. Bernadette spent our next 3 sessions helping me write my victim impact statement for the criminal trial. She had me start by just talking about how Sean's actions affected me while she took notes. Then we organized everything into a clear statement that explained the violation, the betrayal, and the ongoing trauma without getting too emotional or unfocused. Writing it down made everything feel more real, but also gave me a sense of control over my own story. I practiced reading it out loud until I could get through it without crying. Sean's lawyer filed motion after motion trying to get access to his frozen bank accounts for his defense. The judge reviewed his finances and found millions in investments, but ruled most would stay frozen for victim restitution. Sean got furious during the hearing, yelling that it was his money and we were stealing from him. The judge reminded him that committing crimes meant facing financial consequences too. His lawyer looked exhausted, trying to calm him down. 6 months crawled by with endless legal meetings and court dates before Sean's lawyer finally convinced him to take a plea deal. The evidence was so overwhelming that going to trial would mean risking life in prison. Sean would plead guilty to all charges in exchange for 25 years, plus he'd have to register as a sex offender and pay restitution to all victims. Miranda called to tell me the news, and I just sat on my kitchen floor crying with relief that I wouldn't have to face a full trial. The sentencing hearing arrived 2 weeks later on a cold Tuesday morning. I wore the black suit Bernadette suggested would make me look strong and serious. The courtroom was packed with reporters, victims' advocates, and both families. Sean sat at the defendant's table in a suit that hung loose on him after months in jail. When the judge called for victim statements, I walked to the podium with my paper shaking in my hands. I looked right at Sean and read every word about how he drugged me, violated my unconscious body, stole my ability to conceive naturally, and tried to steal my inheritance through fraud. I described waking up confused those mornings 9 months before our daughter's birth, the injection marks I'd ignored, the trust he'd destroyed. I told the court how our daughter would grow up knowing her biological father was a predator who saw her as a tool for money. Sean stared at the table the whole time, his jaw clenched tight. When I finished and walked back to my seat, Terrence stood up to give his statement. His wife held his hand as he walked forward. Terrence's voice broke as he described finding out his stored genetic material had been stolen by someone he'd considered a friend. He talked about the violation of having his future child's DNA used as a weapon against an innocent woman. He explained how this destroyed his and his wife's plans for surrogacy, and left them afraid to try again. His wife sobbed quietly in the gallery as Terrence described their shattered dreams of parenthood. Judge McGill took a long pause after all the statements before delivering the sentence. He called Sean's crimes a calculated betrayal that violated the deepest trust between spouses and friends. The judge said he'd never seen such an elaborate scheme to defraud and assault someone. He sentenced Sean to the full 25 years with no possibility of early parole. Sean showed absolutely no emotion as the bailiff stood him up and cuffed his hands behind his back. He didn't look at me or Terrence or anyone as they led him out to start serving his sentence. The divorce hearing happened just 1 week later in the same courthouse where Sean had been sentenced. Mr. Torres handed me the final papers while the judge signed off on everything, giving me full custody and all our marital assets, since Sean couldn't claim anything from prison. The prenup Sean had obsessed over for months got shredded right there in the courtroom, and watching those pieces fall into the trash felt like watching poison leave my body. I listed our house with a realtor that same afternoon because I couldn't sleep in the bedroom where Sean had drugged and assaulted me. The realtor warned me about selling too fast in a bad market, but I didn't care about losing money. I just needed out of that place. Within 3 weeks, I'd found a smaller house across town in a neighborhood where nobody knew our story, where people wouldn't stare at me in the grocery store or whisper about the woman whose husband went to prison for reproductive assault. Moving day came on a rainy Thursday with my parents helping pack boxes while my daughter napped in her car seat. The movers kept asking about the empty spaces where Sean's things used to be, and I just told them we were downsizing. I carried my daughter into our new home and set up her crib first, then unpacked her toys and clothes before touching anything of mine. That first night in the new house, I actually slept through until morning without waking up in panic. A card arrived 2 days later from Terrence and his wife with a photo of them at an adoption agency. They wrote that they'd decided to pursue adoption instead of trying IVF again after what happened with their stolen samples. They said they didn't blame my daughter for any of Sean's crimes and wished us peace in our new life. I cried reading their words because I'd been so scared they'd hate us forever. My daughter started crawling around the new living room, exploring every corner and pulling herself up on furniture. One afternoon, she spotted her favorite stuffed rabbit across the room and took 3 wobbly steps toward it before falling on her bottom. I dropped the laundry basket I was carrying and scooped her up, crying happy tears while she giggled and reached for the toy. Those first steps in our new home felt like we were both learning to walk away from Sean's shadow. My phone rang one evening with a number I didn't recognize, and when I answered, a woman named Mila introduced herself as someone who'd been dating Sean before his arrest. She apologized for calling but said she'd found journals at his apartment when she was collecting her things, journals where he'd written detailed plans about the insemination scheme months before doing it. She'd already given them to the prosecutors but wanted me to know she was sorry for not seeing the warning signs sooner. The civil lawsuits against Sean got settled using his frozen bank accounts and investment portfolio. Mr. Torres made sure money got set aside specifically for my daughter's future therapy and education, creating a trust that Sean could never touch even after prison. The judge awarded enough to cover any counseling she might need growing up plus 4 years of college. I started back at work part-time while my mom watched the baby 3 days a week. My coworkers had all heard about the case from the news, but they treated me normally, asking about my daughter and sharing their own parenting stories instead of bringing up Sean. Having a routine again, getting dressed for work, and focusing on spreadsheets and meetings helped me feel like a regular person instead of just a victim. Bernadette, the therapist the court had recommended, met with me twice a week in her office downtown. She helped me understand that the red flags I'd missed with Sean weren't my fault, that predators are experts at hiding their true nature. We worked through exercises to rebuild my ability to trust my instincts about people, talking through what felt safe versus what triggered my anxiety. She taught me breathing techniques for when memories of being drugged would suddenly hit me at random moments. My daughter's second birthday arrived on a sunny Saturday with just my parents, my sister, and 2 close friends in our backyard. She toddled around in a pink dress, more interested in the wrapping paper than the presents, chocolate cake smeared across her happy face. Looking at her playing with bubbles and laughing, nobody would ever guess she'd been conceived as a weapon in Sean's sick plan for money. She was just a normal, healthy toddler who happened to have beautiful brown skin and curly hair that I'd learned to style with YouTube tutorials. 3 days after the birthday party, a letter arrived from Sean's mother with shaky handwriting on expensive stationery. She wrote that she'd been replaying every interaction with her son, seeing all the signs she'd ignored or explained away over the years. She apologized for raising someone capable of such evil, and for not believing me at first when the truth came out. Inside the envelope was a check for $50,000 that she said was for my daughter's college fund, writing that it was the very least she could do after what her son had done to our family. I deposited the check but never wrote back because I didn't know what words could bridge that gap. 6 months passed before my friend Lisa from book club mentioned her cousin who'd just moved to town for a teaching job at the local college. She showed me his picture on her phone while we were getting coffee after our Thursday meeting. He had kind eyes and a warm smile, nothing like Sean's calculated charm. Lisa told me he already knew about my situation from family conversations and wasn't scared off by it. We met for lunch at a sandwich shop near the courthouse the following week. He shook my hand gently and asked about my daughter before anything else. Over turkey clubs and iced tea, we talked about normal things like favorite movies and hiking trails. He didn't stare at me like I was broken or damaged goods. When my daughter got fussy in her stroller, he made silly faces until she laughed. We started meeting for walks in the park twice a week, always during daylight with my daughter in tow. He brought her little toys from the dollar store and pushed her on the swings while I sat on a bench watching them play. After 3 months of these careful meetings, he asked if we could have dinner somewhere nice. My mom watched the baby while we went to an Italian place downtown. He held doors and pulled out my chair but never pushed for more than I was ready to give. The notification about Sean's parole hearing came 3 years after his sentencing, delivered by certified mail on a Tuesday afternoon. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter for 2 hours before I could open it. The parole board had denied his request for early release after reviewing his case file and victim impact statements. They cited his complete lack of remorse and the calculated predatory nature of his crimes against multiple victims. The decision meant he'd serve at least 5 more years before his next hearing. I filed the paperwork in my lockbox and went back to making dinner for my daughter. She started preschool that September at a Montessori school across town, where none of the other parents knew our story. The teacher commented on her sunny personality and how easily she made friends during circle time. She finger-painted pictures of butterflies and learned to write her name in wobbly letters. At pickup time, she'd run to me with construction paper crafts and stories about playing house with her new best friend Emmy. Nobody whispered about her origins or looked at her differently. She was just another happy 4-year-old learning to share toys and stand in line for snacks. The photo from Terrence arrived in a Christmas card that December, showing him and his wife holding a baby boy they'd adopted from foster care. The baby had chubby cheeks and was wearing a tiny Santa hat. Their note said the adoption process had taken 2 years, but was worth every minute of waiting. They'd named him James, and he was already sleeping through the night. I taped their photo to our refrigerator next to my daughter's preschool artwork. My counseling degree took 4 years of night classes and online courses while working days at the bank. Bernadette wrote recommendation letters for my graduate school applications and helped me study for exams. The other students in my program were mostly younger, fresh from undergrad, but they accepted me as the older student who brought homemade cookies to study groups. My thesis focused on trauma recovery in cases of reproductive coercion, using anonymous case studies Bernadette helped me gather. The day I walked across the stage to get my diploma, my daughter cheered from the audience wearing a shirt that said, "My mommy did it." The beach vacation happened the following summer at a quiet spot on the Oregon coast. We'd been together for almost 4 years by then, taking things slow and steady. My daughter was building sandcastles near the water when he got down on one knee right there in the sand. He promised to love us both forever, and to be the father my daughter deserved. The ring was simple, just a small diamond on a gold band, nothing flashy or overwhelming. I said yes while my daughter ran over to see what was happening. She hugged us both and asked if this meant she could call him daddy now. We married 8 months later in my parents' backyard with just 30 people watching. My daughter threw rose petals down the aisle wearing a pink dress she'd picked out herself. My sister stood as my maid of honor while his brother was best man. The ceremony lasted 15 minutes with simple vows we'd written ourselves. We served barbecue and potato salad for dinner and danced to a playlist from someone's phone. My daughter fell asleep in her new dad's arms during the last dance. The crisis center hired me part-time at first, letting me ease into the work while still adjusting to married life. I answered hotline calls and led support groups for women navigating custody battles and protection orders. Every story I heard reminded me how common these violations were, and how many women blamed themselves for their partner's crimes. When someone cried about not seeing the warning signs, I could honestly tell them I'd been there too. Some days were harder than others, especially when cases involved children, but each woman who found safety and healing helped my own scars fade a little more. My daughter turned 8 when she started asking real questions about why she looked different from her dad. I'd prepared for this conversation with Bernadette's guidance, keeping the explanation simple and age-appropriate. I told her that the man who helped make her had done something very wrong to Mommy, but that she was perfect and loved exactly as she was. She wanted to know if he was a bad person. I said he'd made terrible choices that hurt people, but that had nothing to do with how wonderful she was. She thought about it for a few days, then asked if her real dad, the one who raised her, could adopt her officially. The letter from Sean arrived on the 10th anniversary of his arrest, forwarded through his lawyer since he didn't have our current address. I recognized his handwriting on the envelope and immediately called Mr. Torres without opening it. He filed paperwork that afternoon for a permanent no-contact order, citing the ongoing trauma his attempts at communication caused. The judge signed it within a week, adding 5 years to his existing restrictions. The unopened letter went back to the prison with a cease and desist notice attached. Years passed, and Terrence started sending holiday cards every December, with photos of his adopted son growing bigger each year. His wife would add little notes about their family trips, and how happy they were with the path they'd chosen after everything Sean had done. My daughter grew up smart and focused, throwing herself into schoolwork and volunteer projects at the women's shelter where I worked. She applied to 12 colleges her senior year, and got into every single one with scholarship offers, but she picked the state university because they had the best program for what she wanted to study. The day the acceptance letter came, she ran into the kitchen waving the envelope and knocked over my coffee mug in her excitement. I helped her move into her dorm room 18 years after that terrible day in the delivery room, carrying boxes up 3 flights of stairs while she arranged and rearranged her desk setup. She graduated 4 years later with highest honors, walking across that stage in her cap and gown, while I sat in the audience crying happy tears. She'd already been accepted to law school by then, determined to specialize in reproductive rights and help other women who'd been violated like I was. During those college years, I started writing down our story in notebooks late at night after my husband went to bed. It took 3 years to finish the manuscript, and another year to find a publisher who understood why this story needed to be told. The book came out when my daughter was in her 2nd year of law school, and within 6 months it had helped push through new legislation in 3 states about reproductive assault. Women wrote to me from all over the country saying my story gave them courage to report their own violations and seek justice. My husband and I celebrated our 15th anniversary that summer, with a quiet dinner at the same restaurant where we'd had our first real date. He held my hand across the table and told me how proud he was of everything I'd built from the ashes of what Sean tried to destroy. We'd added 2 more kids to our family by then, both boys who adored their older sister and had no idea about the darkness that brought her into our lives. The call about Sean came on a Tuesday morning while I was getting ready for work. The prison chaplain said he'd had a massive heart attack in his cell and died before medical could reach him. He'd never admitted what he did, never shown any remorse, never stopped claiming I was the one who'd wronged him. I hung up the phone and felt nothing, but relief that he could never contact us again, never try to manipulate the system, never hurt another woman the way he'd hurt me. My daughter passed the bar exam on her first try to got hired by a nonprofit that specifically handled reproductive coercion cases. She met her husband at a legal conference where they were both presenting papers on consent laws, and he loved her fierce dedication to protecting vulnerable women. They got married in my parents' backyard just like I had, with her brothers as ring bearers and me giving a toast about how she'd turned our worst nightmare into her life's purpose. She's handled over 200 cases now, getting justice for women who thought they'd never be believed, changing laws state by state to make sure what happened to us can't happen to others. Sometimes I look at her in court, arguing passionately for her clients, and I remember that tiny baby in the delivery room who Sean thought would be his golden ticket. He spent 7 years planning to destroy me for money, but instead he created a daughter who's devoted her life to stopping men like him. His darkness gave birth to so much light, not just in her, but in all the women she's helped, and all the laws she's changed. Every holiday card from Terrence, every graduation, every anniversary, every victory in court proves that Sean failed completely. He wanted $10 million and got 25 years in prison before dying alone. He wanted to break me and instead made me stronger than I ever knew I could be. He wanted to destroy my family and instead gave me a daughter who changes the world every single day. That's the full breakdown. If even one part stuck with you, then it did its job. Subscribe if you want to keep learning through these.